You know, I think we've all had that time in our life when someone was giving us advice that we didn't exactly want to hear, and it might even be our fault that we even talked about it in the first place. You know, maybe you were talking about something that you just wanted to vent out, to kind of like vent out your frustrations, just so somebody can hear you. And let's say they're whatever they said, you just didn't like at all. So you just kind of throw it to the wind and say, whatever, I'm not taking that advice because that person, I just didn't like their attitude, or maybe I just don't believe in what they're saying. But hear me out for a second. What if they said was 90% truth and 10% false? You know, are you going to throw out the 90% truth just because you heard the 10% false? Yeah, like, yeah, you could make a judgment of their character, but you know, I'll tell you what, I don't think you can throw out the 90% truth. I mean, like, you can, but I don't think you should. Sometimes we're so caught up in the leaf that we miss the entire forest. Sometimes we're so caught up in the leaf we miss the tree, and let alone the entire forest. Sometimes we get so caught up in the leaf we miss everything. And you know, I think that's a lot of people, where they get so caught up in how they said it, the way they said it. Maybe we can talk about generational divides. Maybe we can talk about the gender war. Maybe we can talk about the political and kind of like culture war. Because there is a lot of attitude being thrown on either side. You know, they might say like, oh, that's so ridiculous, like just playing in extremes. You know, but I think there is something to be said about just kind of taking in what they said, regardless of how hurtful it might have been, or might have sounded, or might have, you know, you might have imagined it to be, and it might not actually be. And you know, sometimes the conversation gets so intense, and like you're trying so hard to rationalize with them the conversation, but man, it's just one insult after the other. Oh, it's just one insult after the other, and you think like, man, like this person is so disrespectful. You know, call them out on it then. You know, call them out on it and say like, man, why are you acting like this? Why are you, you know, casting insults, casting stones my way? Why are you being so insultful? Why can't we just have a good conversation? You know, why do you gotta divulge into, you know, insulting, into casting insults my way? Why can't we just agree to disagree? Why does it have to be your way or the highway? Why can't it just be, you know, we agree to disagree? And you know, I've talked a lot with my dad, especially, because me and my dad don't always land on the same page. Me and my grandparents don't always land on the same page. But you know, I'll talk with them. And they'll say like, you know, Israel is our friend, and I won't outright say it, but I'll say like, hey, well, you know, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And I'll just give them some food for thought. Yeah, I won't try and shove it down their throat, but I'll really try and give them a change of heart. I'll really try and give them a little bit of understanding, and then maybe I'll say like, hey, you know, I understand it from that, but what do you think about this? Like, wouldn't it make sense for this, that, and the other? And you know, if they start getting super irrational, super emotional, and they say like, oh, don't tell me you're one of those liberals. Hell, don't tell me you're one of those MAGA supporters. Then, you know, I'll just kind of back off a little bit, and day in and day out, I'll just keep on trying. I'll just keep on trying to bridge that gap, because man, eventually it's got to happen. You know, however long it takes, however much of a losing battle it might seem, you know, I'll just keep trying. I'll keep trying until I can finally gain some understanding from their side, and I'll keep trying to understand their side. But I'm going to keep trying until they have more understanding for my side. And I found a lot of progress in that. You know, a while ago, I saw a friendly debate. You know, before Charlie Kirk passed away, there was a guy that said, man, are these kind of debates even worthwhile? Because it ultimately divulges in like, hey, it's my way. You know, where, you know, Charlie Kirk said, no, these debates absolutely are necessary. If we stop talking, then, you know, then that's how a society starts getting aggressive. And I completely agree with that. You know, if they stop talking, that's kind of when you see the antisocial aggressiveness that we've already seen. You especially seen You can see throughout body cam videos, throughout patients in the hospital that kind of go through those weird little episodes. However, I don't think that's the full truth. I don't think it's the full truth to really push your worldview onto others, because that's not how you change people's hearts. You know, like as a Christian, I don't you know, if I see like someone down on the street, maybe I say like, hey, what's your relationship with Jesus? And they say like, oh, I don't know, I'm an atheist, I don't really believe in that crap, I think it's just a bunch of fairy tales. You know, if I start telling them like, hey, like you're talking to my God that way, you know, that he's just this like fairy tale creator and that he's not real, dude, like how could you believe that? That's so stupid. And, like, you start casting stones their way, then they're not going to have a change of heart. And you're just going to be stuck with a really bad conversation. I mean, like, you might think it's a good conversation, but what's the end goal of it? Is the end goal just to, you know, win your side, win against the opposition? So you shout them down enough to where they feel stupid and that they have to come forward? Then you aren't changing hearts. You aren't giving a change of heart for other people. And I think that's what Christianity is mostly about, is being able to change the hearts of the non-believers, whoever it may be, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, atheists, agnostics, whatever. And I understand there are like, the apologists who really like preach the faith and actively do debates. But not everyone needs to be an apologist, you know? I don't think that's how you change the hearts and minds of people, you know? Because, you know, I don't know about you, but for me, I've had a lot of vices in the past that I had a very tough time letting go. You know, there were a lot of people that said like, man, just let it go. Just let it go. And like, easier said than done, buddy. You know, easier said than done. You know, it takes time because you've wrapped like your personality in it so much. You know, just give them room to think, you know, just plant seeds in them, if anything. You know, however rude, condescending, whatever they may come across, man, just try and end it on a positive note if you can. Whatever it is, and don't shout them down. Don't shout them down, but try to have a little bit of understanding for where they're coming from. You know, because maybe they have tried to stop whatever vice that they're so hooked on that, you know, maybe some preacher on the corner of like downtown said, hey, you got to repent or you're going to hell. Maybe they are, and I understand like the urgency of that, where it's like, well, I would rather you know, you think that I'm mean than you go to hell. But man, like, you got to think like majority of people don't really understand it from that way, because it really is a heart-to-heart issue. It is a heart-to-heart issue that not a lot of people are willing to see, not a lot of people are willing to admit. You know, they're so into like that debate culture where you know, they try and they chase these clips that go viral. You know, it's like they're going up the list of like top debaters. You know, maybe Christians are going up the list against top debaters against Muslims. You know, they get so hooked on this debate culture that when it actually comes time to evangelize and to really change the hearts of the non-believers, they kind of shout them down. They kind of do like scare and fear-monger tactics on them. And you know, I think that's what a lot of Gen Zers kind of have a hard time with. That, you know, a lot of the older generations didn't, is a lot of different vices. And believe me, I know the older generations, they had like their own vices that they had to deal with, different kind of drugs. You know, everyone says that the boomers were all on cocaine, you know, millennials were all on meth and all, whatever. But generally speaking, the Zoomers, the Gen Zers have more vices that are normalized, you know, especially growing up on the internet. You know, I've struggled with pornography for a number of years, and, you know, I'm trying to quit again. You know, I think I'm on like, about 1.5, 2 months free, which I'm pretty happy about. You know, it might be, you know, attention through, you know, it might be attention and validation through social media, which I know a lot of people, a lot of people in my generation definitely struggle with. You know, that's the kind of sense of belonging that they get. A very bad habit of people in my generation is that they tend to quit. They tend to quit. And going back to social media, they tend to quit because, you know, a lot of people in my generation tend to quit because of what they see on social media. What they see on social media is the product. They see the product and they don't really see the outcome, so therefore they get discouraged. Which is why I'm such a big proponent that social media is probably the worst thing that's happened to society in a very long time. You know, and that's something that I agree with the boomers on, trying to bridge that gap. But anyways, I think that's good enough. I think that's all I wanted to say. All right, bye. God bless.